It is March 7, 2023 at the time of recording. And the Virgo full moon lies across from the Pisces sun. The Pisces sign field is highly activated by the presence of the sun in the sign, Neptune, which has been in Pisces for quite some time, Mercury there in Pisces, and of course Saturn at 0 degrees of Pisces, having just entered the sign. So we are recording this on the day that Saturn has entered the Pisces sign field, where it has found Mercury, the sun, and Neptune on the day of the full moon. And so we wanted to pause, to give a reflection, to let's say put out a message, to think about a few things, to consider a few things at this momentous event of Saturn changing signs. And so Saturn enters Pisces today, March 7, 2023, and it will be in the Pisces sign field until the 24th of May, 2025, when it will then enter Aries. And so Saturn will dip back into Pisces on the 1st of September, 2025, after which it will settle down into Aries in February of 2026. So we are looking at, let's say, about a 3-year period in which Saturn is stirring up the Piscean portions of our personal and collective psyche. It is activating that Pisces sign field. And so as we said, we wanted to give a message today. We wanted to reflect on this transit and to give what we consider to be some valuable reflections, things that we can use, and to not just, let's say, theorize about the energy, but to feel it. So we are recording this at the precise time of the ingress, of the actual entrance of Saturn into Pisces, in order to inhabit the energy, to feel it, to be at one with it, to let our reflections on this be imbued with the feeling tones of Saturn changing signs into Pisces. So Saturn entering Pisces, Saturn now stirring up the Piscean parts of our collective psyche. And so Pisces would imply a negotiation between awareness of the deepest sources of your being. Let's say the deeper spiritual place from which your identity springs, the deeper psychic place, the place of spirit to which your identity belongs, that non-physical basin of consciousness to which you belong. So a negotiation between that and the realities of being a consciousness in a body, in a physical body. And that negotiation is, let's say, the negotiation inherent in the Virgo Pisces axis. So Virgo, where the moon is today, the full moon, Virgo would have to do with the realities of maintaining your consciousness as you are in a physical body, the daily requirements of finding your consciousness in physical time and space. What do you have to do to maintain the body that stores the consciousness that you are? And the deeper bedrocks of consciousness, the deeper basins of consciousness from which your identity springs, the vast pool of consciousness, of spirit, bigger than you, from which you spring. That is what the Pisces sign field would call your attention to. When you invoke Piscean lessons, you would tend to also invoke, let's say, the opposite, or invoke lessons to do with its polarity, which is Virgo. So the whole axis has to do with the reality of your consciousness, your non-physical consciousness, and the place where that is housed, so to speak, place in quotations, That in relationship to your physical life, having to navigate time and space, of which Saturn is said to be the lord of. Space-time, your consciousness within a physical experience, and so Saturn would carry that meaning along with it. Now, the Saturn in Pisces years, well, one thing that it would put on the table is the demand to come face to face with some of the harsher realities, especially where those harsher realities are the truth underpinning any fantasies or deluded thinking. So, in other words, what would have been looking enticing, Saturn says, well, ooh, here is the reality. So the idea that, well, all that glitters is not gold. The truth beyond, or the truth beneath any sort of deluded ideas, delusions of grandeur, illusions. And so this idea of bringing you back to earth, or this bringing you back to earth quality, is something that the Saturn in Pisces years will put on the table from the standpoint of a deeper spiritual intent, facing the reality beneath the delusion, coming face to face with the harsher truths, which delusion and illusion are veneers that lie on top of the deeper truth. And so there is a confrontation with that truth. And so the Neptune in Pisces years, as we've been discussing a whole lot on this channel, well, the Neptune in Pisces years have really highlighted this question: what's really real? What is true and what is false? And the role of the image, the ubiquitous image, the screen, the image on the screen. Can you believe what you see with your eyes in terms of a projection on a screen? Your smartphone, your devices. What's really real? And so the Neptune in Pisces years would call attention to manipulation of the image, the deception that can be enacted when imagery is manipulated. So this idea of what is on the screen and the distortions of perception that come from the screen and the imagery of the screen. And so Saturn entering the Pisces sign field where it finds Neptune, well, you now have to come into confrontation with, well, here are the things I thought were true. Based on the projections on my screen, I thought these images were real. Saturn comes in and says, well, guess what? You now have to face up to the actual reality. So perhaps where you were once blinded by illusion, delusion, fantasy, deception, what is obscured or obfuscated, well, Saturn says, here is now the deeper bedrock of reality. Underneath that obfuscation, underneath that fantasy, underneath that delusion, underneath that projection. And so this idea of bringing you back to reality is going to be, let's say, a major theme running throughout the collective consciousness. Now, Saturn traversing the Pisces sign field would tend to bring up, in sharp contrast, issues to do with cognitive health, mental health, cognitive health, or on the flip side, let's say cognitive and moral breakdown. So where there has been a deeper cognitive decline, moral breakdown, a sort of soul sickness, a sort of sickness of the spirit. And it would raise, well, what must be done to restore people at the spiritual level. So where there are violations at the spiritual level, what must be done to restore people at the spiritual level where there has been this soul sickness? And so these violations, these spiritual violations and these soul sicknesses, well, let's say they are the true costs of delusion, confusion, and cognitive breakdown. So coming to terms with the true costs of cognitive and moral breakdown and decline. Pisces, on one level of the Piscean expression, on one, let's say, frequency of it. And so, for example, this business of medicating, the Saturn in Pisces years would tend to draw attention to the true costs of putting all sorts of medications into the body. And so where these medications would cause a sort of soul sickness, in other words, what you ingest, certain things offered up as medications and remedies and pills, and what is ingested into the body by way of pharmaceuticals or by way of medications, well, the soul sickness that occurs when these substances are introduced to the body and they distort the soul's relationship to the physical body vehicle. So the over-medicating that is, let's say, rampant in certain parts of the planet or on certain parts of the planet, where there would be a tendency to rely a lot on prescription and other medications just to get by, just to wake up in the morning. The true costs, the true spiritual costs of this kind of thing is going to be, let's say, a lot more apparent. And so the true costs of medications, in quotations, that warp and distort the soul's relationship to its physical body vehicle, the physical body vehicle through which the soul expresses. And so, well, you can't operate your body properly because there is this disconnect that is caused by the distortion, the distortion from medicating, from too much medicating. And so the Saturn in Pisces years would highlight and bring into a very sharp focus those who are unable to cope because there isn't that integrity within their biospiritual structure. So the soul vacates. The soul is not anchored into the body. There is a looseness, there is a disconnect between the soul consciousness and the physical body vehicle, and the soul vacates. It vacates, and that leads to all sorts of physical and spiritual malaise and dis-ease in the body because the soul is sick. The Saturn in Pisces years would highlight on one level, the portions of the collective psyche that, let's say, have lost their grip, lost their noodles, lost their marbles, and the costs of that. So when the soul consciousness is not anchored to something that is worthwhile, you lose your grip. And so Saturn in Pisces would highlight the true costs of a losing of your spiritual grip. So the Saturn in Pisces years would call attention to the loss of a spiritual grip and the costs of that loss in real terms. And so yes, the costs of putting things inside the body that are, let's say, alien to or which undermine the natural biospiritual functioning of the body, which keeps the soul and your physical body together and working harmoniously together. And so where there is a distortion of that relationship between the soul consciousness and the physical body, that will become, let's say, a lot more apparent in the collective consciousness. And a true reckoning with the costs of putting things in the body that undermine the spiritual consciousness of the person inhabiting that body. So the question would be, what would need to be done to restore people at the spiritual level where there is a deeper soul sickness? And the soul sickness, as we said, it comes from a cognitive and moral decline. People do not feel as though they have something concrete to hold on to. And you see this, let's say, cognitive and moral decline in all sorts of sectors of society, in all sorts of arenas in the human collective. The loss of something meaningful, the loss of something truly meaningful to rest your feet on, to give you a proper foundation of being, something worthwhile to invest your spirit into. We're not speaking about a belief system. We're talking about a deeper orientation of your spiritual consciousness into something that is worthwhile, into something that allows you to see beauty, to find the dignity of your own spirit, to know your identity, the identity of your consciousness, to feel something inside of you that reminds you of the truth of who you are, that you are a vast consciousness, that your roots extend down into a vast basin that feeds you, a vast basin of consciousness, of spirit that feeds you. And so when you don't rest or place your roots into something that nourishes you spiritually, well, you see all sorts of decline, cognitive and moral decline. And so Saturn would call attention to that, but highlight where there is the need to build up something worthwhile, to have a stronger spiritual foundation, to base your sense of self on something deeper and much more spiritually sustaining and enriching. So Saturn in Pisces, the requirement for spiritual and psychic housekeeping, the idea of having good boundaries for personal integrity, especially in relation to, let's say, mass thought forms in the collective consciousness. So Saturn in Pisces would tend to test your ability to keep yourself and your psyche stabilized in the face of decline, in the face of chaos, in the face of loss of control. And so Saturn in Pisces, the need for deeper spiritual foundations, stronger spiritual foundations that keep you stabilized as there is chaos, as there is breakdown, as there is psychic disturbance running through the collective consciousness, as we are in a time of readjustment at the deepest and most profound levels of our being. And so Saturn in Pisces, with commitment and diligence, Saturn, you are able to open up more dimensions of reality. So with commitment and diligence, let's say reality opens up more to you, the boundlessness, the magic of reality, the things that defy the ordinary rules, the things that show you further reaches of your own consciousness, further capacities and abilities of your own consciousness to, let's say, bend reality. So Saturn in Pisces, the commitment and diligence that allows you to open up into greater dimensions of spirit and greater reaches of your consciousness, and opening up into these dimensions that remind you of who you are. And so that would be an antidote to the confusion, the cognitive decline, the mental breakdown, all this kind of Piscean chaos. So in having some wits about you, some commitment to personal structural integrity of mind and spirit, you allow yourself to open up to more of your abilities, more of the natural abilities encoded in your consciousness that show you greater vistas of reality. Things that would seem to be magic or seem to be some kind of special ability, but they are just upgraded, or not upgraded, but they are capacities that are just opened up where they would have been dormant before. Now they are able to be accessed through some amount of commitment to the integrity of your structure. And so there is virtual reality that you would access through your devices, a sort of Piscean projection, meaning that when you access virtual reality, it is a projection. There is a gap between the virtual reality and in your devices as projected onto your devices, a gap between that and, well, what's really real, so to speak. So virtual reality accessed through devices versus opening up into greater dimensions of your consciousness. So there are, let's say, metaverses, but there is an ability to go beyond into reaches of your psyche and your mind that enrich and augment your relationship with your life. You create beauty, you find nourishment. And this is Pisces. Pisces, a deep Piscean need is to create and to find beauty of the transcendent kind. To look out of your window and to see a quality of light that reminds you of something divine. That reminds you of a deeper divine quality that permeates who you are and permeates your existence. And so there is virtual reality as accessed through a device, and then there is the opening into interior dimensions of your mind and your spirit that allow you to fly, to soar in the skies of consciousness, to open up new abilities, that will allow you to circumvent or go around certain issues and problems. And so sometimes, friends, you don't have to go up against, let's say, the dehumanizing forces of the world. You don't have to get into a fight, a tit for tat. You can learn how to use other portions of your psyche, learn to activate new abilities and see other dimensions of reality for yourself. It's like, well, you could use your vehicle to block the car behind you, or you could learn how to drive much faster. You could learn how to activate the control panel of that vehicle to go much faster. And so you can spend time, friends, figuring out how to combat things that would undermine your spirit, your mind, to go up against it in a kind of fighting fashion. But there is also rising above, meaning going into new heights of your own abilities, your own perceptual, spiritual, cognitive abilities. So you outrun your competition, so to speak. You are going around. And so when you want to, let's say, control a person, you would tend to convince them of a very limited scope of reality. You would say, here is what reality consists of. This tiny shoebox is reality. And if that person wants to break out of that tiny shoebox, well, you could try to tear the sides down. You could try to elbow your way out of the box and create a hole and cut it open. But there's the option to extend your scope of perception so that you outsmart those who would want to control you. There is an invitation to expand your consciousness with Saturn in Pisces, to expand your consciousness through commitment, diligence, and to activate other abilities and extend your perception into other realities that are far more enriching than what you're being told reality is all about. And so there is wisdom in being more agile, not to fight tit for tat, so to speak, but to use your own consciousness. You don't need to be given permission to learn how to use your own mind, your own psyche, your own consciousness. You can go far beyond the parameters of those who would wish to keep you in a certain sort of perceptual box. By learning how to operate your own consciousness and to fly and to see different vistas and different sights and to say, I have this ability. And so the Saturn in Pisces years will be very rewarding to those who would undertake such a task through diligent focus, opening up their consciousness to experience a far more enriching personal reality. Maturing in the use, maturing in the expansion into other portions of their consciousness. And this is what so-called psychedelics would assist you in doing, to open up different departments of the mind to show you more of what you are capable of. And so substances in the earth would assist humans in awakening certain perceptual centers to remind them of what is available to their consciousness, to say, here are different rooms that you did not enter or you would not have entered before. Departments of consciousness to be explored through diligent application, through having some kind of worthwhile spiritual foundation. And when your perceptual centers are more opened, you begin to access more solutions. You begin to have a far more enriching personal experience of reality. And so while there is chaos around you in the world, you are finding that, reality for me is becoming more beautiful. I'm opening up into more of the natural abilities encoded in my human structure. And I'm finding that my life is more beautiful. I can access more beauty, more inspiration, all these Piscean things, divine inspiration, beauty, and enjoying it while you're here in a body. The reward of being in physical form, Saturn, and enjoying an expanded consciousness, Pisces. While you are in physical time-space, enjoying the greater abilities that open up to you as you nod to the spirit inside of you, as you begin to identify with something a lot more timeless inside of you. And the irony is that by identifying more with that timeless, eternal consciousness, you enjoy your chosen human vehicle much more. It becomes a much richer human experience. And so you need not fight all the time. Here are the darker agendas in the world, and here is how they would like to oppress me. That's one thing, to go up against them, but do not neglect, friends, your duty to, through diligent effort, to open up your own human abilities, meaning to crack open more of what is in the code of your humanity. And so many people will find in the Saturn in Pisces years that, reality opens up to them in a much more delicious way. And it is spiritually fortifying, and it allows them to find stability in chaos, stability in deception. Deception would be one level of the Piscean archetype, deception and falsity. And friends, when there is so much deception and falsity, there is a true spiritual cost of that, meaning there is only so much deception that the soul can take before you begin to experience deep violations on the spiritual and soul levels. In other words, you can fool yourself, but not really. You can buy into deception and falsity, and you can delude yourself up to a certain point. And when the deception is so great, your soul checks out. It's not worthwhile to inhabit a physical body or a personality vehicle that is so entangled in deception. It's not worth pursuing a life in this vehicle. And so your soul at that point begins to vacate. It begins to, let's say, disassociate itself from your personality consciousness and your body. And that opens you up to a whole host of dis-ease. And so if your deeper soul consciousness is not inhabiting your body, well, something else will. And so you have to have your wits about you, as there will be, let's say, more chaos, more contagion, mental contagion of confusion and chaos in the collective, in the Saturn in Pisces years. And so the demand on each of you to keep your own personal energetic integrity and to not invest in things that are deluded, because you are undermining your soul and undermining the connection between your soul and your identity as you know it to be. And so there's all of that. Now, on the personal level, Saturn in Pisces will support, let's say, healing, release, forgiveness, compassion, detachment, releasing your spiritual body from accumulated patterns of the past. And so in your relationships, you're able to stand back, to have the maturity that says, I can see the bigger picture here. I can look at this with a kind of compassionate witness and detachment, to release and to forgive and to drain out the past patterns that you would have accumulated, to let these things go, to be free in your spirit, to let go of, let's say, those karmic residues through diligent focus and application of your energy. And of course, to those who have Pisces placements, the upcoming 3 years, well, it will bring growing up. It would bring Saturnian lessons to those with Pisces placements. And there's always some growing up with Saturn, facing the self, refining parts of who you are, learning through effort, the call to a higher standard of being. I'm working on these parts of myself. And so Pisces, well, Saturn could help those Pisces friends to refine their imagination. If you're a bit too far out, you're not stationed in your body and in reality, well, Saturn might say, well, time to be reeled in a bit. Time to rectify and to bring more personal responsibility, Saturn, to where you feel like you are a victim or victimized, Pisces. So healing of the victim consciousness through personal responsibility. So healing the distortions in the Pisces archetype, the Pisces sign field, through your personal stories as Saturn contacts your placements in Pisces or along the mutable axes, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, refining parts of your nature and facing up to these sorts of Piscean lessons and restoring and healing the Pisces architecture. So if there is escapism, healing that, healing where there is victim consciousness that undermines personal responsibility, yet at the same time learning how to surrender, and how surrender and letting go can be extremely spiritually fortifying. Knowing how to let go, when to let go, when to surrender to something bigger than you, not in a spirit of defeat, but in a spirit of cooperation. There is something that holds me in its palm. Whatever your preferred sort of metaphor or analogy is, Spirit, God, higher self, whatever your preferred sort of, name is or definition is, but something. So you can surrender because you feel a sense of safety. And that sense of safety in something that is larger than you, that is benevolent, it allows you to navigate chaos, navigate uncertainty with grace. With grace. You don't need to control everything because you know that you are a part of something greater that sustains you, that holds you up, in which your existence is housed. Something to think about. So invest in a worthwhile spiritual foundation as we navigate the costs of the soul sickness in the next few years. Keep your wits about you. Find beauty. Invest and apply effort into finding beauty, finding peace in your own personal life, in your own private existence. Find beauty, things that speak to your soul and lift you up and remind you of goodness and grace. So these are a few things to consider, to think about as we begin the adventure of Saturn in Pisces from now until 2026. All right, so reminding you as usual that I'm available for a range of private astrological counseling and teaching consultations, and links to that are in the description box below. Also, do be sure to check out the other playlists on the channel for a series of podcasts, lectures, seminars, discussions, and teachings. Until next time, talk soon. Bye.